Welcome to Entrepreneur Voices, the IEC podcast, where entrepreneurs and business leaders share their insights and success stories. In today's episode, host Renae Oswald sits down with Will Jenson, an economist at the Idaho National Laboratory. They'll be diving into the need for market research as Will shares his valuable tips from years of experience. Let's get started.
Welcome to Entrepreneur Voices. I'm Renae Oswald, the host of Entrepreneur Voices, and I'm here with Will Jenson. Will you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, Will Jenson. I'm an economist, actually a nuclear energy economist at Idaho National Laboratory. So I do all sorts of market research related to nuclear energy and all forms of energy, honestly. I've been doing that for a couple of years now. My background in economics is more in labor and regional economics, which studies small economies, and that's kind of what I've been applying to the world of nuclear lately. Is how do energy transitions impact economies? All the different choices out there right now for energy can change how an economy is shaped, and the types of jobs that are necessary, the income levels, and kind of the business climate in the region. So that's been interesting work. But background is I was a labor economist for Idaho Department of Labor for a number of years. I was director of business research at the Research and Business Development Center here in Rexburg. And I taught at BYU, Idaho in the economics department full-time for a few years, and then taught at Idaho State University as an adjunct for about 5 years. And so economics has kind of been in my blood for a long time. I really like entrepreneurship, though. I loved working with entrepreneurs through all of those different positions that I've held. I still get to work with a few entrepreneurs, even with my work with the Department of Energy and Idaho National Lab. So it's good to talk with them, but also great to talk with you today. I'm glad you invited me to come.
Yeah, thank you. We are looking forward to learning more about this particular topic, your expertise, how we can apply it in business, especially around entrepreneurs. Tell me, though, I'm very curious about this role. Did the Department of Energy, the INL, have this role prior to you?
Yeah, so they had a couple of economists on staff. I actually supported them as a contractor for a little while doing economic development work and kind of supporting the lab as a representative of theirs at different economic development meetings around the state, helping communities and things with regard to their relationship with the lab and economic development. So I did that for a few years, and then this role opened up to be a full-time employee there with Battelle, and so I looked at it and thought, that's pretty interesting work, and I get to apply economics to nuclear in a way that I hadn't before, and I still bring some of the tools that I had beforehand. So I do a lot of economic impact modeling work, and that usually we're trying to understand, like I mentioned before, kind of energy transitions. If we trade out a coal-fired power plant with a nuclear plant, what kind of workforce transition would we expect? What kind of change in the number of jobs? How would that impact population growth, or a need for emergency services or other things? Or tax base, which is a pretty big deal when you're going to lose 30% of your tax base for your community because of a coal power plant closing down. The community all of a sudden becomes pretty interested in what's going on, and they're looking for solutions. So nuclear energy is one place that we're looking. It's not silver bullet for energy. It's a kind of a silver buckshot approach, I think, when we're looking at energy transitions and what our nation needs and the energy profile of the different communities and the industries that are around it and the grid and everything. So there's a lot of moving parts, but we're trying to make sense out of all of that.
It's pretty fascinating and great, actually, to think that work is being done, that it isn't just a very singular decision that's made without all of this being considered.
Yeah, there's a lot of forethought, a lot of research, a lot of study, and data analytics. That's a big deal. And making sure the communities are happy with what's happening too, I think is important. So all of that's happening now.
Well, I want to take a little bit of a turn. Thank you for explaining all of that you're doing. It's fascinating work. I want to talk a little bit more about market research and kind of explain to us what is market research? If I was like, that sounds like a fancy name, but I don't even really understand what that is.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't know if anybody's really asked me what market research is. I think a lot of people just assume everybody knows what you're talking about with market research. But, when I think about market research, I think about geography, I think about demographics, I think about understanding consumer behavior and tastes and preferences and whose problem we're trying to solve and what the problem is and how much people are willing to pay to have their problem solved and understanding competition and all of those things I think are part of market research and probably a lot more that I haven't talked about, but that's kind of the basics of what goes through my head when we're talking about it.
Yeah, and pretty key, especially if I'm looking at starting a business. I really need to understand whether the market will support it.
For sure. Yeah, so you don't want to get into a business that doesn't have a market, right? And
But what if I really like it? What if it's my pet project?
Then you got to be willing to lose a lot of money. And if you're happy with that, then whatever,
Yeah.
you do your thing. But most people need to find a way to make something sustainable. And so, if you understand the market and really try to decide, is this something people need? Again, I kind of come back to that question of what problem are we trying to solve here? If there's not a problem, then what are you trying to do?
Yeah.
But entrepreneurs sometimes can get really passionate about things and they just hit the ground running and start making products before they find out if people really want them. And that's kind of a backwards way of doing things in sometimes. But so it's good to do some due diligence beforehand before you get really into something and spend a lot of money and find out that there's not a market for it.
I really appreciate that because I think a lot of us are really good technicians, clinicians, whatever. And so we believe so passionately in the work that we're doing and that our boss might not be doing it right, that we could do it better. And that's the piece that we don't always see about the business owners is the fact that there's so much behind the scenes and so many things that are running, whether this business is successful or not. It isn't just as simple as, well, I'd buy it. And so why wouldn't everybody else do it?
Yeah. And then the other thing is nobody else is doing this. I wouldn't have any competition, if I did this, which is always kind of I kind of rolled my eyes a lot when people said that because there's always going to be some kind of competition and or market forces that you need to really research before you get too involved. It doesn't mean you should abandon your idea, but you just may need to tweak it a little bit to make it fit the market, find the space.
And maybe nobody else is doing it because there isn't a market for it.
There might not be.
Yeah. Interesting. Have you noticed, is there a difference in doing market research for small business versus a larger business, or is it about the same?
Yes and no. Like, it was interesting going from working with small businesses and entrepreneurs here at the RBDC, or the precursor to the Entrepreneurial Center.
Yeah.
Because we were working with startups, pre-revenue startups oftentimes, and then small businesses. And we worked with a bunch of large businesses too. And then, and even, with what I do with Idaho National Lab and Department of Energy, it's like, I've noticed that a lot of times the problems are the same, but the number of zeros behind the dollar sign are
different.
Keep growing.
Yeah.
And so that's different, but the fundamentals I think are pretty similar. Sometimes big businesses will have access to data that small businesses don't have, or they'll have resources and things that they have enough kind of slush funds or whatever, war chest of money that they can take some losses and still keep moving without, a huge impact on staffing and things like that. But, when it's a bootstrapping entrepreneur, that's a little bit different. There's, families involved and people putting their livelihoods on the table and mortgaging houses and things like that. So the pressure's a little bit different, I think, as an entrepreneur, a brand new startup over a large business. But now that I'm done saying that, I also think that those businesses, even a large business, they still have some heartache when something doesn't work and people lose jobs out of it, or they have to downsize or make some staffing changes, and that's not fun either. So,
yeah, I wonder too, I feel like as a small business owner, we are oftentimes very emotionally invested in the work that we do. And maybe that clouds our judgment at times, and those larger businesses maybe are a little bit more removed. I don't know that that's true.
It's possible. I think you are emotionally attached, though, as a smaller business owner, because you do have a lot more riding on it. So, and it's your money. It's not just the corporate funds, and so I think that it becomes more real, I think, the smaller the business gets, probably.
Yeah. Well, talk to me a little bit about customer analysis and how you figure out, how to understand the customer, how to understand that market. What are some of the ways that you do that?
We have the luxury now of using social media. That's one way you can understand customers. There's a lot more data online right now. I remember doing a research project for a mattress firm, and we were trying to understand customers a little bit. And we were looking at some competitors to this mattress company that was going to come to market. And we found another competitor that had this great website and had all these consumer reviews. And the consumer reviews were pretty interesting. They had information about the customer, because you can imagine buying a mattress, you might have different tastes and preferences depending on, I don't know, who knows what. But this one even had whether or not their dog would sleep on the mattress with them, or if it was for one person and two people, and kind of age information. There was almost all this data there that you were just like, wow, that's kind of a lot of data. And now we can go back through, and there were dozens of pages of comments about all these different mattresses. And we were actually able to use a competitor's website for data that we didn't know existed. And I mean, there's little bits of data out there all over the place that you'd never expect to find. But you can do social media polls sometimes, which we've done a fair amount of those over the years. I've helped with a fair amount of those over the years. We were doing a project another time for a big box retailer, we'll say, not to give away any names, but a big box retailer that was really interested in understanding the home health industry during COVID and post-COVID, because there were all these gyms that were closing, and so their store shelves got completely decimated, and they sold every last bit of yoga mat and neoprene covered hand weights and things like that. And they were kind of wondering, is this going to persist? Are we going to see a new trend here where people exercise at home? And we wanted to help them understand that, how are the tastes and preferences of these consumers going to change over time? So we did some small polls, 1-question polls and social media polls all over the United States. And we asked consumers, quick question, hey, how many of you are planning on staying home, after your gym reopens? And yes, no, maybe, those were the 3 options. And there's actually a fair amount of, with those social media polls, there's demographic data once you start looking at who responded.
How did we do this before social media?
Through lots of effort. So big companies like Nielsen would be the big place you'd go and pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in contracts and
they would call people on the phone or send them stuff in the mail,
that kind of thing. So we went about doing these little polls and got back some data and showed it to the client, and they were kind of, oh, that's cool, but I don't know if this is really valid, you guys just did this through social media. So I said, yeah, okay, well, we'll keep doing it. And we did, and we had, a few people on our team, 3 people, I think. And over the weekend, we kept doing these polls. And then I said, we got to figure out a way to prove that this is actually valid, that this is good data. And so we asked a little bit more information about the market and where are you buying your stuff from? So with the goal that we'd be able to figure out how this market was shared between the different competitors in the market. And with the goal that we'd be able to go back to our client and say, we figure your market share is about this, this number is what we come up with, and prove that we were pretty accurate. And so we did that. We came back to the client after sharing more data that we'd been collecting. And we said, we also did this thing where we wanted to see what your market share was for these products. And these are the numbers we came up with. And we were on a Zoom call with them.
That got their attention.
That got their attention. The head person over home exercise equipment, her jaw dropped on the phone call. And she's like, you're within 1.5 percentage points of what Nielsen says our market share was.
So it's pretty accurate.
Very accurate.
Yeah, if you do it right.
If you do it right, you got to ask your questions right. But we were able to understand the market really well through some really simple over the weekend kind of stuff that really helped make some decisions at the corporate office of this company. So it's pretty good.
So it brings up a question to me. My husband and I have automotive repair shop. I think when I think about our target audience, it's everybody who has a car. Perhaps everybody who has a car that is out of warranty would be more appropriate. But how do you determine what the appropriate or the correct or find the target audience for these companies?
That's a good question. I mean, you start by asking questions, I guess. Finding the target audience, you make some assumptions, use your brain, to start off with, and then test to see if your assumptions are correct. And if they're not correct, you got to go back to the drawing board. But if you are correct, you can gain some confidence that you're going down the right path. So I think testing is one way. Hopefully, you're doing some good old legwork. I mean, if you're comparing a big box store with a new startup, a big box store, hopefully they're collecting data about their existing customers. It allows them to understand their market pretty well. And as you're starting out as a new business owner, hopefully you're collecting data that will allow you to understand who your customers are. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important as you're doing any kind of market research, is you got to begin with the end in mind. It's kind of a cliche statement, but it's really, really important.
Mm-hmm. And work backwards.
Work backwards. These are the kind of questions I want answers to. How am I going to formulate a question to answer that question? Or how am I going to create questions to answer that accurately and exactly the way I need to, and not have to sit back and say, dang it, we asked a question wrong. We should have asked it this way. And that's the other important thing. Test your model a little bit. So we never like to go out doing a big old, 10,000 person survey without testing it on 5 or 6 people first. Mm-hmm. And so that's the other important thing, is go out, test it out, do a little pilot, analyze the results, and see if the results are telling you, or painting the picture that you expected it to paint. And then if it is, move forward, do it, get more data, and keep analyzing it in small bits so that you can tweak things as you need to without burning up all of your respondents all in one big,
because
you're
not going to be able to send them the same thing 5 times and have them answer it a different way.
You can't unring the bell.
So I've kind of decided my target audience. I see that there's people out there, but when I'm looking at my competitors, let's talk about competitor analysis. If I find out that there are multiple automotive shops, I keep using that as an example because it means something to me, but does that mean I necessarily don't have a business because there are several competitors out there? No,
it doesn't mean that. So one thing you could do is, there's a lot of government data out there that could help you do that. Bureau of Labor Statistics, for example, they have information about the number of businesses by establishment type. So they actually, it's number of establishments by industry is the correct terms that they use. So I could take a community, as long as it's a community that's big enough anyways. Rexburg's big enough where you're not going to get into a situation where the Bureau of Labor Statistics isn't going to disclose this kind of information. Madison County, is definitely big enough. So you can get on their website and pull up and say, the automotive repair industry, how many establishments are there and what's the total employment for this area? And then you can say, all right, per capita, is this normal? Like, should there be, how many are there in Madison County?
Yeah, you'd think I would know that. I don't know.
Oh, you don't know that? You need to know that.
I do need to know that.
So let's say that there's 12?
Yeah.
10?
Sounds good.
And if you find out that statistically, per capita, you need to have maybe more or less than that, some number more or less, that gives you an idea how competitive is this market. I got asked the same question. Well, actually, I got asked to come speak to Upper Snake River Dental Association. I just thought, what am I going to talk about with a bunch of dentists? But I had this theory that every time I went to the dentist, there was something like, oh, yeah, we really should get a crown on that.
Yes,
I was like, I might
replace
just make
that filling.
Yeah, honestly, it just felt like I was making somebody's boat payment, right? So I was like, okay, well, let's do some analysis on this. Before I go to this meeting, I did this. I looked at location quotients, which is this kind of this per capita businesses measurement and asked, through data, I asked myself, look at this data. Is Madison County really high in dentists and Bonneville County, Eastern Idaho? How does it compare to other states?
Because if you asked me, I'd say yes.
And you're right. In fact, Idaho and Utah, especially Eastern Idaho, have way more, almost twice as many dentists per capita as normal communities would. And so I came with that data to this presentation and I asked them, like, what do you have to say about this? Like, I ran these numbers. Do you feel like it's a really competitive area? And they were like, it's incredibly competitive compared to some of these other places in the country that are, their classmates went on to work in after graduation. This area is crazy. And then I was like, yeah, you go down a parade route here in Eastern Idaho, and there's just dentists throwing toothbrushes at kids left and right.
Yeah, you're getting toothbrushes.
And it's because it's so saturated. So there's government data out there you can look at to say, yeah, this is saturated. Maybe it's not the best place. Let's do the opposite. Let's find places that are really low saturation in certain industries. And then maybe that's our target, location to move to. But all through data, you can try to avoid making mistakes. And there was a dentist at that meeting that had just graduated and just purchased a brand, like a retiring dentist's practice. And he was all excited. I kind of met him before the meeting. And by the end of the meeting, he was looking pretty scared.
Like the reality of what he stepped into.
Yeah. And he just realized that he's in one of the most competitive and most saturated dental markets in all of the United States.
Yeah. Wow. So many things to take into consideration there when you think you're just coming maybe even back home to take over practice.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Will. Hey, we're going to take just a quick break now and to have a word from our sponsor.
Perfect.
Hey, listeners. We hope you're enjoying today's episode of Entrepreneur Voices. This episode is brought to you by Oswald Service and Repair, the trusted name in automotive repair and service since 1939. Learn more about how Oswald Service and Repair can keep your car happy and healthy at oswaldserviceinc.com.
We're back with Will Jenson. Okay, so Will, when we're thinking about the competitive analysis, and you just gave us an example about dentistry, well, if I come into a market that has competition like that, am I able to be successful just by setting myself apart with the type of quality that I produce?
Well, I think then it comes back to, are you filling some kind of niche? Are you offering some service or some product that isn't currently offered, or is everybody else just kind of doing their thing and not really paying attention to customer needs or consumer needs and tastes and preferences? So it just means you're going to have to get even more diligent with doing your market research and paying attention to your customers. And then, price competition comes in there too. Mm-hmm. Are you offering it at a competitive price so that, there's that balance between price and quality and all of those things. And there's segments within markets too. So maybe you decide, if we're using the dentist example, maybe there's a lot of people working with adults, but are there kids that need dentists, or is that niche being filled? So you could be in a really saturated market for adult dentistry, but maybe pediatrics is the area that you need to move into, or maybe it's other kind of demographic. You need to work more with the Hispanic population and do Spanish speaking, services or something, which
some
is
way to really set yourself apart.
Yeah. And in Idaho and Eastern Idaho, that's really important too. So you got to find ways to set yourself apart and meet your customers where they're at too.
So I think about, some of these industries that we're in, dentistry, automotive, medical, we all have bodies, we all have teeth. Many of us have vehicles. It seems like in the industry, these type of services or similar things to it will be around forever. I think that's maybe a bit of a naive way to look at things, because we know now like how AI is shaping different industries. I think it's going to change healthcare. Mm-hmm. Certainly electric vehicles are changing the automotive industry. What kind of advice do you have around researching industry trends? How do we go about that?
Well, one thing I would look at is doing a Porter's 5 Forces analysis. I don't know if you've heard of that at all, but with Porter's 5 Forces, you're looking at different attributes that would contribute to whether or not you'd be profitable in a certain industry. So you're looking at things like the threat of new entrants into that market, or bargaining power of suppliers, threats of substitutes, bargaining power of the buyers, rivalry among the different competitors in the market. And I think I really liked using Porter's 5 Forces over the years because it does help you kind of analyze those different aspects of the market that you're moving into, and helps you make some decisions, some strategic decisions. You could look at, cases of that I've gone through with students before in my econ classes where I talked about this, looking at Netflix and kind of how Netflix is going to stay relevant as they've had more competitors, as the movie production studios decided that they wanted to take away Netflix's ability to distribute their films, and then Netflix said, "Oh, well, we've got to produce our own now," and so now Netflix has their own work.
Right.
And then you've got companies like Disney that came along, and Disney's got all this content already made, and all they have to do is snap their fingers and they'd have a website that's up and competing with what Netflix was doing for years, So, things can change really quickly, and they may be very profitable in the short run, but unless you're paying attention to all 5 of those forces at the same time and constantly, refreshing whether or not you're producing something that gives you a competitive advantage, then I think you can find yourself on the streets pretty quick.
Yeah, you look at a company like, I'm dating myself, but Blockbuster, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were the thing and didn't see how Netflix was going to be their threat.
Yep. Get it by mail. Reduce that transaction cost for the customer. Create high switching costs. That's the other thing I kind of look at. Like, switching costs are like, airlines have done this because they've got a product that's very similar, right? You go to the same airport, you get on airplanes made by the same company. The snacks are maybe a little bit different, but the flight
Basically,
time's
you're going
the same.
from A to B. Yeah,
you're going to A to B with different graphic designs on the outside, and so you get companies like that, and they can go out of business too if they're not careful. They really have to understand their customers' needs. So, but the one way that they say, we're going to keep these customers is offer a loyalty or rewards program. And then the cost of switching to a new airline becomes really high.
Yeah, right.
And you get kind of locked in. Same thing, other industries that are similar to that. I stay at Marriott hotels all the time because then I can maintain my Marriott Gold standard, and I get upgraded and I get late checkouts,
points.
and I wouldn't want to go stay at somewhere else because then I'd be giving up my chance to move up the ladder on my rewards program. So, creating those switching costs, making it kind of cost a little bit for you to switch to another company, that's another trick of the trade to try to keep those customers from moving to a different competitor.
Well, it works. Delta and American Express have us locked in for, they're smart. They're smart that way.
They are smart.
All right, let's talk a little bit about SWOT analysis. Can you tell us what a SWOT analysis is and how does it apply to market research?
Yeah, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. I actually am not a very big fan of SWOT analysis.
Oh, talk about that.
Yeah, I don't like it because I like Porter's 5 Forces more because I think it forces you to be a little bit more strategic in how you move forward and how you analyze your competition.
Yeah.
And even seek out, other competitive forces that you hadn't really thought of before. I've seen a lot of SWOT analysis kind of presentations, and afterwards it's just kind of like, that was
nice.
Fun. And I always kind of think about the Three Amigos. If you've ever watched Three Amigos, they do a little SWOT analysis with the people of Santa Poco, if you remember, and they decide, well, we can sew, right? That's our big strength. We can sew. So they get out there and they're sewing up outfits, and they attack El Guapo and win, and that's great. Their SWOT analysis worked. But I think there's other things you can do besides SWOT analysis. If you're going to get into a SWOT analysis, really go through and think about your strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. You got to make sure that in each of those cases that you're finding something like actionable at the end of that SWOT analysis, because oftentimes I've seen people do a SWOT analysis and they get done and it's just like, people. That was fun.
Well, and I
look
too
at our
think
SWOT
that-
analysis. And then it's like, okay, well, what action are you going to take? Oh, I don't know.
I don't know, but that was the fun exercise.
Look at
And
our
I
SWOT.
think we also do it with our rose-colored glasses on.
That
It's hard
too.
to look at threats when I don't really want to see them.
Yeah.
So I don't actually have a good way of identifying them if I can't
Yeah.
stand back 20,000 feet and look.
It's helpful to have someone like a third party do it, I guess. But then the third party, sometimes third parties are just there to make you happy and tell you what you want to hear too. And that's how they get good reviews. So again, it's kind of the dynamics of SWOT analysis. Sometimes I think you're better off doing something different.
Yeah.
But it's there. It's a tool. It's worth looking at. You should always think about those things: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. But I think you just got to come to it, or start out with the idea of everything that we do in this SWOT analysis needs to have some kind of actionable result that we can do something with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some kind of
And that you
action
actually
item.
act on.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you saying that it's a tool, because that's, what a lot of these things are tools, and we don't just use one of them. We've got to look at all of our arsenal. Talk to me a little bit about as a small business owner, like what are some practical tips that entrepreneurs, small business owners can implement who might not have big budgets to fund major marketing research?
Yeah. Well, again, begin with the end in mind. What problems are you trying to solve for your customer? And are you asking questions in a way that you can answer that, right? And there's a lot of ways you can follow up. There's some low-hanging fruit. Get contact information from your customer and follow up with them. Do little surveys. I mean, it's worth your time and reaching out frequently, but not so frequently that you alienate them and they unsubscribe from you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're maintaining contact with them and asking them, if it's a product that you're going to try to sell to them over and over again, make sure that you're reaching out and getting good information from them, because the big businesses are doing that too. They've got a lot more budget to do it. But a personalized touch, as a small business owner, reaching out to a former customer and to potential customers, information is king. The big businesses out there are using big data, AI kind of stuff to analyze markets, and you can use AI too. You can jump on and use any of these ChatGPT or other resources to help get information, but you can start collecting your own data so that you can analyze that and make good decisions. You think about the big competitors. Amazon knows when I need dog food before I do. And that's pretty amazing when you think about it. And as an economist, decades ago, not even decades, a decade ago, the Federal Reserve was like the big, they had all the information. 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago, definitely they were the source of all this knowledge. And now I think they wish they had as much information about consumer sentiment and economic trends and business climate as what Walmart and Amazon and Apple have. Those giants have at their fingertips so much data that it's hard for them to even think about how to analyze all of it, but they're starting to figure that out, especially with AI and more computers to help them crunch through it, because when you've got millions and millions and hundreds of millions of customers, it gets harder and harder to analyze.
Yeah, what are you even looking at?
So that's, I guess, kind of one benefit that small businesses have is it's not millions and millions and hundreds of millions of customers yet. It's dozens or hundreds or 1,000 or something. And then things get a little bit more digestible. So I think, collecting that data is important. Leverage the data that exists. I'd mentioned the Bureau of Labor Statistics and other government data. Even though you may be a small fish in a big sea, there's some of that kind of big sea data out there that government is collecting that you can use to help you get by. I don't know, did I do a good job answering that?
I think one of the things I really appreciated about that is, as a small business ourselves, we've built an email list of our customers, and we recently thought about expanding our services to something that was not automotive repair, but could be parallel. It's just kind of something else out there. And we actually took that to our customers and said, here's what we're thinking about. What do you how would you guys feel about us getting into this business? What do you think? And it was really interesting, the feedback that we got. And looking at that data in addition to other things that we had looked at, helped us decide not to do that particular business. And so I do think for some of our customers, that was actually building of trust, because we actually turned to them to help us decide whether this was something that they felt like we should get into. And the great feedback we got is, you guys do a good job at what you're doing, do it and do it even better. Stick with what you know. And I was like, I can appreciate that. So I really liked what you said about reaching out to your existing clientele or those that you might have some trust with, or people that can, give you some feedback about that business. I think that's a great tip. I appreciate so much all of this information about market research and all of the tips. Are there things that we didn't talk about that you want to address before I let you go?
Yeah, that is a good question. We went through a lot of good questions. So I guess I would say, don't underestimate your ability to get involved in new industries and take some risks, but do it with, some data behind you. I think that's important. Talk to people around you. There's resources at universities that can help out. There's always going to be data out there that can help you make some kind of decision a little bit easier. So I'd say just pursue all those opportunities. Class projects sometimes are a good way to do that at a university. Talk to, like people at the Department of Labor. I was a regional economist at the Department of Labor, and I got called by businesses a fair amount, but not as much as I could have been utilized. There's a lot of resources like economists at the state level that are there to help you out and get you information and guide you to resources that you didn't know existed. Come in and talk to the people here at the Entrepreneurial Center. They'll line you up with people all over Eastern Idaho that are here to help out. And so I think that's important to remember, that you don't have to do it alone. You've got some people around you that are willing to help, and if you spend enough time doing that, I think you can make some pretty good decisions that will help your business be successful.
Yeah, thank you for that. I loved the idea of just knowing that you're not alone, that you don't have to, we don't know what we don't know. And that's why there are specialists like you who have studied this for your lifetime that we can turn to, have some questions answered. There's a lot of resources out there. And as entrepreneurs, small business, startups, whatever we are, do your homework, reach out to other individuals that are there to help, and find out some of these answers before you invest your entire life in something that might not work out. And although that's a hard message to hear, better hear it in the beginning than in the end. Yeah.
And the other thing I would add, don't forget you need to pay yourself too. I see a lot of entrepreneurs that forget to pay themselves, and they're passionate about doing something that's not, making enough money for them to even, pay their house payments or buy food and groceries, and they'd be better off at McDonald's or somewhere else. And that's fine for a certain amount of time, but at some point you've got to be able to pay yourself. So factor that in at the beginning. Yeah. What you need to be able to make this work long term, and that's important.
Yeah, that's great advice. And we could do a whole episode just on that, because so many of us as new businesses are like, no, I'll sacrifice. And that should be part of your expenses right up front.
Yeah, you will sacrifice, and that you can do that for a certain amount of time, like I said, but at some point you got to.
Just can't.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Will, for helping us to understand market research and all the things that go into that, and things for us to consider as we are looking at our own businesses. We appreciate you and your time today, and thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Entrepreneur Voices. We hope you gained valuable insights from Will Jenson's expertise. Be sure to join us next time as we welcome David Nowak, Regional Director for the Eastern Idaho Small Business Development Center. Until then, stay inspired, and thanks for being a part of our community.